barrister, I worked in several trials that went on in this building. In fact, I think I was in the last trial in this building before it closed as a courthouse, defending people. So I'm slightly shell-shocked to find myself up here, because I'm used to sitting down there, as I know Ross is as well, and to looking up at three judges staring sternly down at me and my colleagues. So it's a rather odd feeling. It's also an odd feeling, I have to say, to have entered this building without having to do this and be body searched, because I missed that, you know. But the entrance through which you all came was the entrance when the building was in courtroom, through which members of the public, the defendants, if they're on bail, their friends and family, and defence lawyers all had to come through. And each of us were body searched and our names entered and bags searched and so on. The prosecution team, on the other hand, and I know this because I had friends in the prosecution side, used to enter by the front door without any body searching, without any bags being searched and so on. And one of my colleagues on the defence side got so exercised by this that he threw a huge tantrum one day and insisted that he would be accorded prosecution privilege. So there you are. It's a building that really has an incredible history. I mean, Cathy mentioned Robert Emmett's trial, and there's the old dock bar, as many of you will know, which is still on display, at which Robert Emmett and indeed the Invincibles were tried, and a number of other people. So it's got a great resonance. It's also, however, despite having this resonance and this aura that I know Peter will also have felt, and I'm sure we'll talk about, but despite all that, it's also located, of course, in a very down-to-earth part of Dublin. And so, you know, again, the recollection is always of coming up here in gown and wig and all the robes and so on and all the books, and yet having to watch out for slipping on banana skins, literally and metaphorically, as you come up through the fruit markets. So it's got an unusual setting for a courthouse as well. And I suppose that's a strong sense of being right in the centre of Dublin. I want to pick up some of the themes Colm raised about difference between law and justice, and to speak about the issue that he touched on, the issue of abortion, and Irish law on abortion, which I view as being utterly at odds with justice. I think our law on abortion is utterly unjust, and I have had personal experience of fighting the law on abortion from the outside, not as a barrister on the inside in a courtroom, but as a defendant, or as a defendant in a contempt of court case. But I want to just speak briefly first about the current context in which we're speaking. I've just come from Leinster House, where people were gathering for a protest, another in a series of protests, to express the huge levels of public anguish and outrage at the absolutely tragic death of Savita Halappanavar. I think all of us who watched the interview with her husband Praveen on prime time would have been so moved and so heartbroken for him. The fact that a young woman could die in her 17th week of pregnancy in a hospital in Ireland for what were preventable reasons, and that's been made clear by objective obstetrician and gynecologists who've spoken about it. And the fact that the lack of clarity in our law has at least been a contributing factor, and that we know that there's a grey area for physicians and for women as to when doctors may intervene to save a woman's life where the pregnancy poses a risk to her life. This is utterly unjust, and it's a situation that has to change. And I must say, this week I'm very heartened that we have now before us a blueprint for legislation in the shape of the expert group report, widely leaked before Monday, before Tuesday, but which we now know to contain essentially an outline as to how you can legislate to ensure that there is greater legal clarity for doctors where women's lives are at risk due to their pregnancy. And I think that's something that it has taken us 20 years to get to, but it is something that at least we are now moving towards, and there is clear momentum for legislation. I'm really glad that the government has announced that in 3 weeks' time it will give a decision. I don't think there can be any decision but the decision to legislate. I'm a Labour Party senator. The Labour Party has had very clear policy in favour of legislation for a long time now, and we'll be pushing very hard for that to come about. But what is very sad is that even when we do have this legislation, it will only provide for abortion to be legal, for legal abortion, that is abortion where a woman's life is at risk, be it physical risk or risk of suicide. It won't provide for abortion in any other circumstances. And yet we know that over 4,000 women last year left this country to go to England for abortion, most on grounds other than risk to life. We know that in the last 30 years, over 100,000 women have travelled to England. And all of us know women, friends, family members who have made that journey. And yet our law does nothing to recognise their their real health needs. Now, this is something I feel very strongly about as a feminist, as a pro-choice woman and as a politician. But it's something, as I say, that I've had a direct personal experience of being outside of the law on. Because as a student union officer in 1989, as president of Trinity Students' Union, myself and my fellow officers were brought to court by an organisation that I'm sorry to say has resurfaced in recent days. Some of you may recall SPUC, the Society for the Protection of the Unborn Child. Notable for the chant we used to use at student demos, SP, SPU, SPUC, SPUC off. But I was reminded of that when I saw SPUC had issued a statement this week condemning the expert group report and condemning the government for moving towards legislating. SPUC took a case. SPUC were a much more active and assertive and indeed intimidating organisation in the late 80s. And in 1989, they took us to court and threatened us with prison for contempt of court because they had a court order preventing us from giving information on abortion to women in crisis pregnancy. At the time, for those of you who don't know the long and tortuous saga of abortion law, due to the 1983 amendment, which equated the rights to life of the mother, so-called, and the unborn, due to that amendment, the courts had ruled that it was illegal to give information on abortion because that might lead to a woman taking the life of the unborn or having an abortion in another country. And therefore information had become illegal. And all the women's counselling centres that had provided such information to women, that was the names and addresses and phone numbers of clinics, had all been closed down. So we in the Students' Union movement were the only people still publicly providing that information. And I have very vivid memories as a 21-year-old of having 5-6 women a week coming into our office in Trinity and in distraught condition, in very distressing circumstances, looking for the phone number of a clinic in Britain, which we gave them. But because of that, we were threatened with prison. We held, in true student fashion, a last night of freedom party before we marched before we marched down to the Dáil. It was a great party, I must say. There's nothing like that sense. We'd had advice that Mountjoy Women's Prison at the time was a particularly nasty and inhumane place to be kept. So we were rather fearful. I mean, there was a bit of a bravado, but we were fearful. But having said that, Mary Robinson stepped in, defended us in court, got the case referred to the European Court of Justice, where, again, a long legal saga continued. We ended up making a legal precedent, not being sent to jail, and, of course, then events were overtaken because the X case transpired in 1992, and the Supreme Court there said where a woman's life is at risk because of her pregnancy, she's entitled to legal abortion. So we come back to that situation. But that's 20 years ago now. I thought 20 years ago that when in 20 years' time, and I have 2 daughters of my own now, that they wouldn't have to fight this fight all over again. And it's desperately depressing to feel that we're still standing back at that point of trying to defend the need for legislation to clarify when you can terminate a pregnancy to save a woman's life. I mean, this is just outrageous. If there is ever an injustice in Irish law, this is it. I've recently been quite outspoken in the media about this. I think it's hugely important, but I just wanted to end tonight by saying I don't believe that anyone who calls themselves a feminist cannot be pro-choice. If you're feminist, you must be pro-choice. To me, it's fundamental. When we see the needs of women, when we see the needs of women to contraception, the needs of women to reproductive health rights, the needs of women to illegal abortion, to me it's self-evident. We know how many thousands of women in developing countries die where abortion is illegal, and they die from backstreet abortion. We're very fortunate in Ireland that we have legal abortion available to us just across the water. But we have an abortion rate that is equivalent to the abortion rate in any Western European country. We just pretend it doesn't go on. I believe this culture of silence and of hypocrisy has gone on far too long, and I would appeal to all of you trailblazers tonight and over the next few days, which are crucial, to get out there, to focus on Fine Gael TDs and senators who are under unbelievable pressure currently from the anti-choice side, and to persuade them that public opinion has moved on, that people want to see legislation to clarify the situation where a woman's life is at risk because of her pregnancy, to ensure that we do have legislation to implement the X-case test, and to push them on that side, because this is where it's at the moment. Over the next 3 weeks, we're going to see debates in Dáil and Shannon. We're going to see Fine Gael TDs and senators, as I say, coming under enormous pressure pressure. They're being subject to very intimidatory tactics from the anti-choice, anti-abortion side. And I think we need to make that difference and to get voices heard from the pro-choice side, not even from just from the pro-choice side, from people who just believe we need a humane response to the tragic death of Savita and to ensure that there are no future deaths like that. This is a building where there's been a long history of the politics of legal repression through the Offences Against the State Act and the machinery of state repression. I'd like us tonight to make a start towards breaking free of the politics of women's repression, which is what I believe our law on abortion constitutes. Thank you very much.